Most people think the Titanic sank for one reason. It hit an iceberg. That is true. A giant ship met a giant piece of ice in the North Atlantic. The hull opened, water came in, and less than 3 hours later, the most famous liner in the world was gone. Except that answer is too small. If we were ranking the reasons Titanic sank, the iceberg would not be the whole story. It would be the first domino. The more interesting question is why that one collision became a mass casualty disaster. Why did the damage spread? Why were lifeboats leaving with empty seats? Why did a ship seen as the peak of modern safety expose so many weak spots at once? So this is a ranking of 7 reasons, from the obvious trigger to the deeper failures that made the sinking so deadly. One of them is a controversial engineering clue: rivets and cold steel. Not the cartoon version where bad rivets sank Titanic, but the careful version, which is messier and more useful. The first reason is the one everyone knows: the iceberg. Titanic did not hit it head-on. It scraped along the starboard side, below the waterline, opening several areas of the hull to the sea. That detail matters. One hole in one place is one problem. Damage stretched along the side is worse because water can enter multiple compartments at once. Think of dragging a key along the side of a car, except the car is a steel liner and the key is a floating wall of ice. The damage was not one clean movie-style gash. It was more likely a series of openings and separated plates. That sounds less cinematic, but for a ship divided into compartments, it is exactly the kind of damage you do not want. Ice did not need to tear the ship open like paper. It only needed to compromise enough seams below the waterline. Steel plates can bend. Rivets can fail. Water does the rest. Still, an iceberg alone does not explain the disaster. Ships crossed icy waters before. Captains knew the North Atlantic could be dangerous. That brings us to the second reason: speed. Titanic was moving fast in an area where ice had been reported. The British inquiry later put the ship's speed shortly before the casualty at about 22 knots and judged that excessive under the circumstances. That does not mean the officers were cartoonishly reckless. In that era, large liners often maintained speed unless visibility or conditions made danger impossible to ignore. The culture was closer to keep watch, keep moving, avoid what you see. That sounds insane now because we know the ending. At the time, it fit a broader belief that modern ships, good officers, and open sea gave enough margin. But speed compresses time. The lookout rings the bell, the bridge reacts, orders are given, the helm starts to answer. But a 46,000-ton liner is not a bicycle. It does not twitch out of danger because someone made the correct decision at the last moment. The third reason is quieter. The night made the iceberg harder to see. There was no bright moon throwing a clear outline around the ice. The sea was unusually calm, which sounds peaceful, but it removed one of the warning signs sailors often used. When waves break against ice, they can create white water around it. On a flat, dark ocean, the iceberg becomes a darker shape in darkness. The lookouts were not asleep. That is one of the cheap simplifications. The official British findings did not say they were simply lazy. They did say the lookout was not sufficient in those conditions, especially with the ship running at high speed. An extra lookout forward could have helped. Officers watching carefully from both sides of the bridge could have helped. Binoculars come up in almost every Titanic argument. They make a neat symbol. No binoculars, disaster. It is tempting but not clean. The bigger problem was the combination: darkness, calm water, high speed, and not enough margin. You see the problem. Each piece is survivable by itself. Together, they make the iceberg appear too late. The fourth reason is the controversial engineering one: rivets, steel, and cold water. We need to be careful here. Titanic was not a cheap, flimsy ship built by people who had no idea what they were doing. Later metallurgical work has described the hull steel as state-of-the-art for its time in important respects. So the fair version is not Titanic sank because it was badly built, but recovered samples have complicated the picture. Some studies found that the steel could become more brittle at ice water temperatures. Research on wrought iron rivets also found elevated slag content and suggested that rivet quality may have helped steel plates open during flooding. That is not the same as saying the rivets were the main villain. It means they may help explain the pattern of damage. A rivet is not a glamorous object. It is a metal pin, heated, hammered, and trusted to hold plates together under stress. Titanic had millions of them. Some were steel, some were wrought iron. When the iceberg pressed against the hull, the plates did not need to shatter dramatically. If rivets failed or seams opened, water could pour through along the joins. Small detail, big consequence. This point belongs in the middle of the ranking, not at the top. If you make the rivets the whole story, you ignore the speed, the warnings, the evacuation, and the safety culture. If you ignore them completely, you miss a real engineering clue. The fifth reason is easier to prove and more devastating. The watertight compartments were not watertight enough for the actual damage. Titanic had watertight doors that could be closed from the bridge, and after the collision, they were closed. That was modern safety. It was one of the reasons people trusted the ship. The idea was that water could flood some compartments and the vessel would still float. The limit was brutal. Titanic could survive a certain number of compartments flooding, but the iceberg damage affected too many forward areas. Water filled the front, the bow sank lower, and then water could spill over the tops of bulkheads into the next compartment. Imagine a row of buckets separated by walls that do not reach the ceiling. Once one bucket is too full, it pours into the next. That is the design clue hidden inside the word watertight. The compartments were watertight sideways, not sealed like individual boxes from bottom to top. In Titanic's scenario, that was not enough. The sixth reason is not why the ship sank, but it is one of the biggest reasons the sinking killed so many people. Lifeboats and evacuation. Titanic did not have enough lifeboat capacity for everyone. The ship carried more boats than outdated regulations required, but the regulations were built around tonnage categories, not the actual number of people aboard. That sounds bureaucratic until you imagine standing on a cold deck, watching a boat lower away with empty seats. Even worse, the boats were not used to full capacity. Early in the evacuation, some passengers did not understand the danger. Some did not want to leave the warm, lit ship for a tiny boat hanging above the Black Sea. Some officers were uncertain how many people the boats could safely carry. Loading was inconsistent. Picture the scene without movie music. The deck is only slightly tilted at first. The lights are still on. The ship is huge. Someone says it is only a precaution. Someone else tells you to put on a life belt. Your coat is in the cabin. The lifeboat looks smaller than the ship, because of course it does. That sounds minor, but it matters. Disasters are full of people waiting for the situation to look like a disaster before they act. The result was horrifyingly practical. Seats left empty, time lost, and hundreds of people with no place to go when the final minutes arrived. If Titanic had carried enough lifeboat space and had drilled a clearer evacuation system, the sinking would still be a catastrophe. It might not be remembered as the same kind of failure. The seventh reason is the one that ties the ranking together. Overconfidence in the whole system. This is bigger than one captain, one designer, one radio operator, or one officer lowering one boat. Titanic came from a world that had fallen in love with size, speed, luxury, and engineering confidence. The ship was modernity at sea. Steel, electricity, wireless, watertight doors, polished wood, and engines that felt like the future. The danger is that every safety feature became a reason to feel safer than the situation allowed. Watertight compartments made flooding feel manageable. Wireless made rescue feel reachable. Regulations made the lifeboat arrangement feel legitimate. Experience made speed near ice feel normal. The size of the ship made the ocean feel smaller than it was. Then the rescue problem exposed the gap between confidence and reality. Carpathia responded and came, but it was too far away to arrive before Titanic sank. Californian was closer, and the British inquiry concluded it could have reached Titanic if it had acted after the first rocket, but it did not. Wireless watchkeeping, rocket signals, and assumptions between ships became part of the tragedy. This is why the final reason deserves to be at the top. Not because overconfidence is more physical than an iceberg. It is not. The iceberg was the trigger. But overconfidence explains why so many weak links were waiting for that trigger. Too much speed, too little margin, impressive compartments with limits, lifeboats that met rules but not reality, and rescue systems that were not yet treated as a constant necessity. Titanic did not sink because of one stupid mistake. It sank because several reasonable-looking choices lined up in the worst possible order. If we rank the causes honestly, the iceberg is the headline. Speed is the avoidable danger. The dark, calm night is the trap. Rivets and cold steel are the engineering clue, important but not the whole case. The watertight compartments are the design limit. The lifeboats are the human tragedy. And overconfidence is the reason all of those pieces were allowed to sit so close together. That is why the story still works more than a century later. Titanic was not an ancient ship from an ignorant world. It was a modern machine operated by trained people under rules that seemed acceptable at the time. And that is the uncomfortable part. Advanced does not automatically mean safe. Legal does not automatically mean enough.
Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. See you in the next one!